I stared at my phone screen, reading my mom's text. "When are you coming over for dinner?" Same routine, as always. First, I had to check if Sarah would be there. My stomach churned just thinking about her name. At 28, I had a good life on paper. A nice apartment downtown, a corner office as PR manager at Marshall & Partners, and enough money to live comfortably. But family gatherings? Those required careful planning. Was Sarah coming? I texted back, "No, Candace. She's with friends tonight." Relief washed over me. I could go. It wasn't always this complicated. There was a time when we were just a normal family. Well, as normal as you can be when your dad dies and leaves behind 2 toddlers. I was 2, Sarah barely 1 when it happened. Then Tom, our stepfather, came into our lives when I was 3. He never tried to replace Dad, but he became a father to me in every way that mattered. He taught me how to ride a bike, threatened my first boyfriend, and cried at my high school graduation. He was there for everything. "Coming over at 7?" I texted back. "Yes," Mom replied with a smiley face. Driving to their house, I thought about how things used to be, Sarah and I sharing a room, fighting over clothes, typical sister stuff. But Sarah always had this thing about her. She needed to have whatever I had. My toys would mysteriously end up in her bed. My favorite sweater would disappear into her closet. My friends would suddenly become her friends. I pulled into the driveway, the smell of Tom's famous lasagna filling the air before I even reached the door. Tom greeted me with a big bear hug as I entered. "There's my girl," he beamed. "Just in time. Dinner's almost ready." Mom bustled around the kitchen, adding the final touches to the salad. "Sweetie, you work too hard. You look tired." "PR never sleeps," I laughed, helping her set the table. We chatted about work, Tom's bowling league, and Mom's garden. Normal family stuff. But there was always this elephant in the room, the reason I had to check if Sarah would be there before visiting. 3 years ago, I had it all figured out. Jake and I had been together since senior year of college. He was perfect, kind, successful, funny. We were planning our wedding. Invitations had gone out, and the venue was set. 2 months before the big day, I stopped by his apartment to surprise him with lunch. I still remember the sound of my heels on his hardwood floor, the way the afternoon light filtered through his bedroom window, and the sight of them together, my fiancé and my sister tangled in his sheets. My wedding dress was hanging in my closet at home. The centerpieces were being assembled in Mom's garage. The screaming started immediately. Jake stammering excuses, Sarah just sitting there with a look on her face, not even shame, but something else. Satisfaction, maybe. "Actually," she said, "you should thank me. I showed you his true colors. He would have cheated after the wedding anyway. I canceled everything. The venue, the flowers, the dress. I dealt with the pitying looks and awkward conversations. But the worst part? Sarah's attitude, like she'd done me a favor, like betraying me, was some twisted act of sisterly love. She dated him for 6 months after that, flaunting it on social media before moving on to someone else, just like she had with my toys, my clothes, and my friends. But this time, she'd broken something that couldn't be replaced. My parents tried to stay neutral after the whole Jake disaster. I guess that's what parents are supposed to do. Love both their children equally, even when one of them betrays the other. Mom and Tom would listen to my anger, nod sympathetically, but they never cut Sarah off. She was still welcome at Sunday dinners. She still got invited to family events. Her childhood bedroom was kept exactly as she'd left it. "We understand how you feel, honey," Mom would say, stirring her coffee. "But she's still your sister." Tom tried to be supportive in his own way. "Time heals all wounds, kiddo," he'd say, patting my hand awkwardly across the dinner table. But he didn't understand. This wasn't about time. Every visit to their house became a strategic operation. I'd text ahead, making sure the coast was clear. Mom would slip in comments about Sarah, how she was doing, how she missed me, as if Sarah were the victim in all this. "She asks about you, you know," Mom mentioned during one dinner. "She feels terrible about what happened." I stabbed my fork into my pot roast. Terrible enough to sleep with my fiancé 2 months before my wedding? The silence that followed was deafening. Mom pushed her food around her plate, and Tom suddenly became very interested in his green beans. Then came that Tuesday evening. I arrived at their house to find Mom and Tom already at the dinner table. The mood was unusually somber. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, and Tom looked exhausted. "What's wrong?" I asked, hanging my coat by the door. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "Sit down, honey. We need to talk about something." Tom reached across the table and took Mom's hand. He looked older somehow, more worn down than usual. "The doctor says I need to cut back on work," he said quietly. "My blood pressure's through the roof, and my heart—" He trailed off, squeezing Mom's hand. "Tom's switching to part-time," Mom continued, her voice shaky. "We'll manage, but things are going to be tight for a while." I watched them both. These people who had given me everything, looking scared and vulnerable. Tom, who'd never asked me for anything, who'd raised me as his own, now couldn't meet my eyes. "How much do you need?" I asked without hesitation. Mom looked up, relief flooding her face. "Even $1,000 a month would help, just until we figure things out." "Done," I said immediately. "I'll set up a monthly transfer tomorrow." 4 months later, I was scrolling through my calendar when a date caught my eye. June 15th. Mom and Tom's 25th wedding anniversary was coming up. A quarter century of love, commitment, and raising 2 girls who weren't even his, one of whom turned out to be, well, Sarah. The idea hit me during a client meeting of all places. We were discussing a luxury resort campaign in Hawaii, and suddenly I could picture Mom and Tom there, enjoying the sunset, finally taking the vacation they'd never been able to afford when we were kids. I spent my lunch break researching hotels, comparing amenities, reading reviews. By the time I drove to their house for our weekly dinner, I could barely contain my excitement. "You two better sit down," I announced, bursting through their front door. Mom looked up from the stove, spatula frozen mid-flip. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing's wrong," I grinned, pulling up the booking website on my phone. "But you might want to clear your schedules for the first 2 weeks of June." Tom settled into his chair at the kitchen table. "Why's that, kiddo?" "Because," I said, building the suspense, "you're going to Hawaii." The silence lasted exactly 5 seconds before Mom dropped her spatula. "What do you mean, Hawaii?" she whispered. I showed them the pictures on my phone, the luxury beachfront hotel, the infinity pool overlooking the ocean, the elegant restaurant with views of the sunset, first-class tickets, I explained, scrolling through the itinerary. 2 weeks at the Royal Hawaiian Ocean View Suite with a private balcony, a couple's massage package included. Consider it a 25th anniversary present. Mom's hands flew to her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes. "Oh, honey, we can't possibly—" "You can and you will," I insisted. "You both worked so hard taking care of everyone else for so long. It's time someone took care of you." Tom stood up and pulled me into one of his bear hugs. "This is too much, sweetheart." "Nothing's too much for the best parents in the world," I said, hugging him back. We spent the rest of dinner planning. I showed them the booking confirmations, the flight details, all the extras I'd added to make it special. Mom kept wiping her eyes, looking at the hotel pictures over and over. "I need to buy a new swimsuit," she declared, her voice full of excitement. "And maybe a beach hat. Oh, and sunscreen. Tom, we need to get you some proper beach clothes too." Tom just sat there, grinning, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. "I can't remember the last time we had a proper vacation," Mom said, reaching for her phone. "I need to request the time off first thing." "Me too," Tom added, though I'm sure they'd understand. 25 years is a big deal. I watched them plan and dream, their faces lit up like kids at Christmas. Mom was already talking about never leaving the water, reading books on the beach, and walking hand in hand along the shore with Tom. "I've already paid for everything," I explained, showing them the confirmation emails. "All you need to do is pack and show up at the airport." Mom got up and hugged me again, her cheeks wet with happy tears. "You're such a good daughter, Candace. We're so lucky to have you." The day before their departure, I was organizing my schedule to take them to the airport when Mom called. "Hey, sweetie," she said, her voice slightly higher than usual. "About tomorrow?" I replied, pulling up my calendar. I'll take an extended lunch break and drive you guys to the airport." "Oh, no," Mom interrupted quickly. "You don't need to do that. We'll just take a taxi." I frowned at my computer screen. "Mom, it's no trouble. I want to see you off." "We're sure," she cut in firmly. "The taxi's already booked." Something felt off about her tone, but I couldn't place it. "Are you sure?" "It's really no problem," I insisted. "Absolutely sure," she said too quickly. "Now I need to go finish packing." I leaned back in my office chair, the nagging feeling growing stronger, but I didn't push it. If she didn't want me to take them, then fine. Still, I couldn't shake the odd sense that something wasn't quite right. After hanging up, I stared at my phone for a moment before dialing her number again. "Sorry," I said. "I just thought of something. I can stop by and water your plants while you're gone. Those roses of yours need daily attention in this heat." There was a pause, just a fraction too long. "Oh, no need to worry about that," Mom said hurriedly. "Mrs. Johnson next door already agreed to handle it." "Mrs. Johnson?" I repeated, the name sounding familiar. "The one who killed her own garden last summer." "She's gotten much better," Mom said quickly, brushing off my comment. "Really, everything's taken care of. You focus on work." That evening, I sat in my apartment, trying to shake off the weird feeling from our conversations. Mom was probably just excited about the trip, I told myself. First real vacation in years. Of course she'd be acting a little strange. The next day dragged on at work. I kept checking my phone, waiting for updates. Finally, around 5:30, a text came through. "On the plane. Taking off now. Thank you again for this amazing gift, sweetie. Love you." I smiled at my phone, picturing them settling into their first-class seats. Mom already planning which pool to try first. Tom cracking jokes. It made me feel good knowing I had done something special for them. But as I drove home, something gnawed at me. I couldn't explain it, but the need to check on their house was there. I told myself it was just an overreaction. I wanted to make sure everything was locked up properly. But then, as I neared their street, I saw it. The familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood were quiet in the early evening light. I turned onto their street, mentally rehearsing what I'd tell Mrs. Johnson if she spotted me checking the house. Then I saw it. Warm light spilled from the living room windows, casting a golden glow on Mom's rose bushes. The TV's blue flicker was visible through the curtains. They were supposed to be 30,000 feet in the air by now. Someone was in my parents' house. My first instinct was to call the police. Someone had broken in, but then I noticed Mom's garden gnome was still in its usual spot by the front door. A burglar wouldn't have moved it back so precisely after breaking in. My hand shook slightly as I pulled my old house key from my purse. Taking a deep breath, I approached the door as quietly as possible. The TV's volume was low, but I could hear the familiar sound of ESPN SportsCenter, Tom's nightly routine. My stomach dropped. I turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open. There he was, Tom, lounging on his recliner with a beer in hand, feet propped up on the coffee table. He looked up at the sound of the door, and the color drained from his face. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice echoing through the house. "You're supposed to be on a plane to Hawaii right now with Mom, remember?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. Instead, he focused on the growing beer stain on the carpet. "Listen, sweetie, I can explain." "Where is Mom?" Each word came out like ice. I was already feeling the weight of this moment. Tom's shoulders slumped. He looked smaller somehow, standing there in his old Rangers t-shirt and sweatpants. She went with Sarah." The room started spinning. "What?" I whispered. "Sarah?" "She's been having a rough time lately," he stammered. "Financial problems, depression. Your mother thought she needed this trip more than I did. Did the monthly money you've been sending really help her get back on her feet?" My mind started to connect the dots, and the chill in my chest deepened. The money, it hit me all at once. The $1,000 a month I had been sending, the money I thought was helping them through Tom's health issues. It had all been going to Sarah. Tom, sensing my shock, tried to cover up the lie. "Your mother thought... We thought Sarah needed the help, and we knew you wouldn't want to stop." My voice was eerily calm now. "You've been lying to me for months, taking my money and giving it to her?" Tom reached for me, but I backed away. The father who had taught me how to ride a bike, who'd threatened my first boyfriend, who'd walked me down the aisle at what should have been my wedding, he was a stranger now. "Please let me explain," he begged. "Save it," I said, holding up my hand to stop him. "I don't want to hear about poor Sarah's problems. Not anymore." I stormed out of the house, the rage burning inside me like fire. My hand shook so badly as I gripped the steering wheel that I could barely feel my fingers. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse of Tom standing in the doorway, looking lost and small in the porch light. The drive home was a blur. My mind kept replaying every dinner, every conversation, every time they'd asked about the monthly transfers. How long had they been planning this? How many other lies had they told me? I pulled into my apartment complex's parking lot, but I couldn't bring myself to get out of the car just yet. The magnitude of their betrayal was still sinking in. My mother, my stepfather, the two people I trusted most in the world, and Sarah, always Sarah, taking and taking and taking. I sat at my kitchen counter, laptop open, my hand steady despite the rage burning inside me. A quick calculation, with the time difference, they should have landed in Hawaii by now, probably heading to check in at the hotel I'd spent weeks researching. The one with the perfect ocean view I'd specifically requested for them. I dialed the hotel's number, drumming my fingers on the counter as I waited. "Royal Hawaiian, how may I assist you today?" A cheerful voice answered. "Hi, I need to cancel a reservation immediately," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "It's under Candace Mitchell," I added. "Oh yes, I see the booking here. 2 weeks, ocean view suite." The receptionist paused. "The guests haven't checked in yet. Is everything all right?" "No," I said flatly. "It's not. I need to cancel it right now." "I understand there might be fees," he began. "I don't care about the penalty," I interrupted. "Just cancel it." After handling the hotel, I logged into my airline account. 2 first-class return tickets, scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Cancel, confirm, done. Then, against my better judgment, I opened Instagram. I hadn't looked at Sarah's profile in years, having blocked her after the Jake incident, but now I needed to see. I created a dummy account and found her page easily. It was exactly what I expected, only worse. There she was, posing in designer clothes I knew she couldn't afford, standing outside expensive restaurants with a champagne glass in hand, every caption more smug than the last. "Living my best life on someone else's dime." Why pay when others will do it for you? I scrolled until I found today's post. There she was in the airport lounge, smiling in vacation clothes. Sarah and Mom, both beaming, posed in front of the first-class check-in counter. My mother, the woman who had raised us to be honest, to work hard for what we wanted, beaming next to her younger daughter like everything was perfectly normal. Sarah's caption read, "Off to Hawaii for the vacation I deserve. Someone special is making all my dreams come true." The comments rolled in, "Oh my God, girl, your new man must be loaded. Spill the tea! Who's the mystery sponsor?" Sarah's responses were just winking emojis. "A lady never kisses and tells." She was mocking me. She knew exactly what she was doing, flaunting my money, my gift, my generosity, and Mom was right there with her, playing along with the charade. I closed my laptop, walked to the kitchen, and made coffee. My movements were mechanical as I ground the beans, heated the water, and poured it over the grounds. The familiar ritual helped steady my hands. Now all I had to do was wait. My phone buzzed exactly 90 minutes after I canceled everything. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I watched it ring out, then ring again, and again. 10 calls. The messages started pouring in. I let each one go to voicemail. I took a slow sip of my now cold coffee, my hand steady, but my insides were a storm. The messages piled up, each one more desperate or cruel than the last, but I didn't pick up. Not yet. On the 11th call, I finally answered. "Candace, where's our reservation?" "It's gone. The hotel says it was canceled. What's going on?" Mom's voice was frantic, the kind of panic that only comes when something's gone terribly wrong. I let the silence stretch between us for a moment before speaking. My voice somehow was calm, steady. I canceled it. Canceled it? What do you mean, you canceled it? Her voice wavered, confusion mixing with fear. I stopped by the house earlier, I said, each word measured, my voice strangely controlled. Funny thing, Tom was home, watching TV. Didn't look like he was on a plane to Hawaii. There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing on the other end. The sound of her disbelief hit me like a slap. She didn't know what to say. "What do you mean, Candace?" she finally asked, her tone turning defensive, like she was trying to piece together a story that no longer made sense. I saw Tom, Mom. He was sitting in the living room drinking beer, watching sports. Your vacation wasn't happening. The only thing happening is you lying to me again. The words came out harder now, my anger bubbling up with each sentence. "Where is Mom, Tom?" I had asked him before leaving. He'd given me an answer, but it wasn't one that fit. "Sarah's been having a rough time lately," Tom had stammered. "Financial problems, depression. Your mother thought she needed this trip more than I did." Something about that statement sat wrong with me even as I walked away. And now, hearing Mom's voice crack as she tried to justify it, I knew everything had been a lie. My voice was cold now. "You've been taking my money for months, thinking I wouldn't find out. You've been lying to me about Sarah, and now you've stolen the gift I gave you for your anniversary." I could hear her voice rise on the other end, strained with frustration. "That's not what's happening here. Sarah, she's struggling. She needs help. Your father and we thought it was for the best." "Best?" I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "You thought stealing from me was for the best? What happened to all those times you said I was doing too much for Sarah, that she needed to grow up? Is this really how you repay me?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. She had no response, not one that could justify what they had done. My stomach twisted. I needed answers, not excuses. "Where did the money go, Mom?" I demanded. "The monthly payments? Was that all for Sarah? Was I just a fool for thinking I was helping you and Tom?" Her voice faltered, but then she regained some composure. "She needed it, Candace, and we couldn't stop. We didn't want you to stop sending it. Sarah she was in a bad place. I thought she needed this vacation more than I did." "More than you did?" I echoed. "So much more that you'd lie to me and steal from me? How could you do this, after everything I've done for you?" "Please, sweetheart," she pleaded. "I never meant for it to be like this, but I didn't want to hear it anymore. I hope you saved up enough of that help for your trip, because I'm done. I canceled everything, the tickets, the hotel, everything. You're on your own now." The words hung in the air, final and heavy. And then she snapped. "You selfish, ungrateful child," she screamed into the phone, her voice cracking with anger. "After everything we've done for you, you're going to leave us stranded in Hawaii?" I pulled the phone away from my ear, the shouting still echoing in my head. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm again, almost too calm. "I didn't leave you stranded. I made sure you got what you deserved." I hung up before she could say anything else. The phone slipped from my hand, and I sat there in my apartment, feeling the weight of it all. The betrayal, the lies, the rage. I had just cut ties with my mother, with Tom, with the family I thought I knew. Messages started coming in, more from Mom, more from Tom, each one getting more desperate. At first, it was all apologies. "Please, Candace, we can work this out. We're sorry. You're breaking my heart." Then it changed. The tone shifted and the cruelty crept in. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" Mom's voice was angry, defensive. "You think you're so much better than everyone else." And then Sarah's message came through. An unknown number, the familiar bite of her words. "You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? Well, guess what? You're just a bitter, jealous bitch who can't stand to see me happy. Mom's right about you. You're pathetic. Have fun sitting alone in your apartment while we enjoy Hawaii." I didn't even read the rest. I just blocked the number. I didn't need to hear it, didn't need to feel the poison they were trying to inject into me. I blocked Mom's and Tom's numbers too. They were dead to me now. The TV droned in the background, some cooking show where everyone was kind to each other and problems could be solved in 30 minutes. Aunt Linda called me a week into their trip. She couldn't help herself. "They're staying at the Paradise Inn," she reported, her voice uncertain. Well, it's not exactly the Royal Hawaiian." I didn't respond. I didn't need to hear it. But Aunt Linda continued anyway. "Your mom had to max out her credit card just for that. They flew back economy class. Sarah complained the whole time about the leg room." I said nothing, but I could hear her hesitation on the other end. She was walking on eggshells. "She told me not to tell you," Aunt Linda continued softly. "But I think you had every right to do what you did." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Work, then quiet evenings alone. I reorganized my apartment, started taking yoga classes, had dinner with friends who didn't know my family drama. Life, it seemed, went on. But everything had changed. Exactly 1 month after the Hawaii incident, an unfamiliar number lit up my phone. "Where's this month's money?" Mom demanded, no preamble. "It's the 5th, and nothing's come through." I almost laughed. "Are you serious?" Her voice was cold now. She needs help. You promised." I cut her off, the words coming out without thinking. "Of course I'm serious. I'm done funding her lifestyle." There was a pause. Then her voice turned cold. "So that's it?" "Yes," I said, finally letting the truth out. "I'm done." "You're cutting off your family?" Her voice was flat, accusing. I couldn't stop the laughter this time. "Family? You mean the people who lied to me for months, who stole my gift and turned it into some sick joke? Yeah, that's family." "Mom warned you," she said, her voice sharp. "If you stop helping us, you're cutting yourself off from this family." The irony almost killed me. "No, Mom. You cut me off the moment you decided to lie to me twice. The monthly payments, the vacation, those were just the final nails in the coffin." I hung up before she could respond. It's funny how fast things can change. 1 minute you think you know someone, your family, the people who've been there through it all, and the next, they're strangers. I'd never thought I could feel so cold, but after everything, I wasn't sure there was any warmth left between us. Days blurred into weeks. Work became a distraction. I threw myself into it. Client meetings, campaigns, press releases, back-to-back phone calls. It was easier to focus on that than think about my family. But sometimes when I was alone, the quiet would remind me of what I'd lost. I found myself driving past their house on my way to work, like some sort of sick habit. Mom's roses were wilting. The porch swing, where I had my first kiss, was peeling and worn. Tom's car was always in the driveway now. Aunt Linda told me his health had actually taken a turn, which I guess was supposed to make me feel something. But it didn't. I'd heard about it, but nothing in me softened. Not after everything. A part of me wondered if I could have handled things differently. Maybe I could have been more understanding about Sarah's supposed depression, more forgiving of Mom's misguided attempts to help her favorite daughter, more accepting of Tom's passive role in all of it. Then I'd remember Sarah's social media posts, her flaunting my money, my anniversary gift, Mom's casual lies at dinner, pretending like nothing had happened, and Tom sitting alone in that house, covering for them both. No. Some betrayals leave marks that don't fade. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. Some family ties, it turns out, are actually chains that need to be broken. One morning, I woke up to another text, a number I didn't recognize. My heart sank even before I read the message. It was Sarah. "You think you're better than everyone else, don't you?" she'd written. "Well, guess what? You're just a bitter, jealous bitch who can't stand to see me happy. Mom's right about you. You're pathetic. Have fun sitting alone in your apartment while we enjoy Hawaii." The message made my blood boil, but it also made me laugh. How predictable. Always playing the victim, always twisting everything to make me look bad. I didn't bother responding. I just blocked her number and then blocked Mom's and Tom's. That was it. No more games, no more pretending. A few days later, I heard from Aunt Linda again. She called me just to tell me that Mom and Tom were back. "They're staying at the Paradise Inn," she said again, as if that would somehow make things better. "It's not the Royal Hawaiian, but they're getting by. Your mom had to max out her credit card for that, though." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Aunt Linda hesitated. "They flew back economy, you know. Sarah complained the whole time about the legroom." She sounded uncomfortable, like she was telling me something I didn't want to hear. "I don't need to know," I said, cutting her off. "Thanks, though." Aunt Linda didn't press it further. "Well, you know, I think you had every right to do what you did. That's all I'll say. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. This wasn't about right or wrong anymore. This was about me finally taking control of a situation that had spiraled out of my hands for far too long. As for Mom and Tom, they didn't contact me for weeks. It was like they were waiting for me to reach out, to cave, but I didn't. Not once. I knew that if I gave them an inch, they'd take a mile. So I stayed strong. Then exactly 1 month after everything fell apart, Mom's number appeared on my phone again. I stared at it for a while, the anger and betrayal flooding me all over again. "Where's this month's money?" she demanded when I picked up. "It's the 5th and nothing's come through." I almost laughed. Almost. "Are you serious?" "Sarah needs help," Mom said again, like she was reading from a script. "You promised." I didn't want to hear it. "Of course I'm serious. I'm done funding her lifestyle. You and Tom can figure it out without me." There was a sharp pause on the other end. I could almost hear her brain scrambling to come up with a way to get what she wanted. "So that's it?" she asked coldly. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my chest. "Yeah, that's it. I'm done." "You're cutting off your family?" she spat. The words were thick with disdain. "I'm cutting off the people who lied to me for months," I said. "Who took my money and used it for their own selfish purposes. Who stole my anniversary gift and turned it into some joke. That's who I'm cutting off." Her voice grew louder. "You've always been so selfish. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By punishing Sarah?" "Punishing Sarah?" I repeated. "No, Mom, I'm not punishing her. I'm just not going to let you and Tom keep playing me for a fool anymore. If you need help, you'll have to figure it out on your own." I could feel the weight of her stare on the other end of the line, even though we were miles apart. "You're dead to me," she finally said, her words sharp and final. "I hope you're happy." "I am," I said simply, and then I hung up. I sat there for a long time after that. The phone felt heavy in my hand, like it was still buzzing with the weight of everything that had just happened. I knew this was it. There was no going back now. There would be no more Sunday dinners, no more pretending that everything was fine. I thought about Tom. I thought about all those years he had been there for me, all the little things he'd done. And maybe, just maybe, I could have tried harder to understand what he was going through. But the truth was, Tom was complicit. He could have said something. He could have told me the truth. But instead, he let me think everything was fine. And when I needed him the most, he betrayed me. The days after that were strange. I felt free, but also empty. It's like something deep inside me had cracked, and for a while, I didn't know how to fill the hole it left. I worked, I exercised, I kept busy. But I couldn't stop thinking about how everything had fallen apart, how my family had imploded so completely, leaving me standing alone. But that was the thing. I wasn't alone. Not really. I had myself. And that was enough. One morning, Aunt Linda called again, her voice low, like she was worried about how I'd react. "Candace, I just wanted to let you know," she started hesitantly. "Your mom and Tom, they're not doing too well. Tom's health took a real turn. He had to go back to the hospital. They're both struggling, you know. I thought you should know." I was quiet for a long time. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to reach out, to help, but the other part of me knew I couldn't. Not after everything, not when they'd kept lying to me, to each other. "I hope they figure it out," I said, and that was all I could manage. The phone call ended there, and I sat in silence. There were no tears, no grand realizations, just a cold, quiet truth. I had done the right thing, and that was enough. It's strange how you think time will heal everything, how you expect the sharp edges of betrayal to soften with distance. But they don't. The cuts remain, even if they're not as raw as they were at first. It's like a scar. You can move on, keep going, but it's always there. I'd made my decision, and I stuck to it. I wasn't going to let them pull me back into their web of lies. But the silence was deafening. I didn't hear from Mom, Tom, or Sarah for a while. It was like they were waiting for me to crack, for me to apologize, for me to come crawling back. But I didn't. I kept to my routine, work, friends, the occasional yoga class. I went to dinner with people who didn't know about my family drama, people who didn't judge me for cutting them off. It was easier that way. But there were moments, quiet moments, when I'd find myself thinking about them, about how it had been, about how I missed the simpler times when everything hadn't been so tangled up in lies. The holidays came around, and I knew it would be hard. Thanksgiving, Christmas. Those were the times when families came together. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would they try to reach out? Would they pretend like nothing had happened, like the last few months hadn't turned everything upside down? Thanksgiving came, and I spent it with friends, not family. The first time in years I hadn't been at my mom's table. But I was okay. I wasn't going to let their absence take away my peace. The phone call came a week later. It was Aunt Linda again. I could tell by her tone that she didn't want to be the one to tell me this, but she had to. "Candace," she said, her voice heavy with something I couldn't quite place. "I think you should know. Your mom and Tom are in real trouble. Tom's health, well, it's gotten worse. The doctors don't know what's going to happen." I paused, the weight of her words sinking in. I felt that old ache, like I should care more than I did, like I should feel something. "Is he okay?" I finally asked, even though I didn't know why I was asking. I had cut them off. They weren't my responsibility anymore. Aunt Linda sighed. "I don't know. He's been in and out of the hospital. Your mom's struggling too. I think she misses you." The words hit harder than I expected. Miss me? After everything? After how she let Sarah tear my life apart? I swallowed the bitterness in my throat. "I don't know, Aunt Linda," I said, my voice low. "I've made my decision. I'm done." Aunt Linda didn't argue. She didn't push. She knew I wouldn't change my mind. But there was a sadness in her voice that lingered long after we hung up. I didn't want to feel sorry for them. I couldn't. Not after everything. The weeks passed, and things went back to a new normal. I focused on work. I spent time with friends, and I finally started to feel like myself again. I was independent, self-sufficient, and I didn't need them to define who I was. But one night, as I was winding down, my phone buzzed with a new message. A number I didn't recognize. I opened it. It was a text from Sarah. "Don't think you've won, you haven't. You're nothing without us. You'll see that soon enough." The text was short, to the point, but it wasn't just the words that struck me. It was the anger in them, the jealousy, the venom. Sarah had always been that way, taking and taking, never knowing when to stop. And now she was lashing out, blaming me for the mess she'd created. I felt a pang of frustration, but also a strange kind of pity. She was never going to change. She was stuck in her own cycle of manipulation and lies, and that was her problem, not mine. I didn't reply. I just blocked the number, and that was that. The holidays passed without incident. I spent Christmas with my close friends, laughing, eating, enjoying the kind of peace I hadn't had in a long time. The empty space where my family had once been wasn't so overwhelming anymore. It felt freeing. But as New Year's rolled around, something shifted. Maybe it was the quiet, maybe it was the passing of time, but I found myself thinking about them more. Not in the way I used to, where the pain of betrayal kept me angry and resentful, but in a way that was more reflective. I thought about Tom. How he'd stepped in when I was young, how he had always tried to do right by me. I thought about Mom, how she had always been there, but had let her own selfishness blind her to the damage Sarah had caused. And I thought about Sarah, how she had torn everything apart, and how she was still trying to make me feel guilty for it. I realized that I wasn't angry anymore. Not at them, not at the situation. I was just sad. Sad for all the things that had been broken, for all the bridges that had burned, for all the years spent pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. And then it hit me. I wasn't responsible for their happiness. I had spent so much of my life trying to make things right, trying to fix things, trying to hold everything together. But I couldn't fix them. They were broken long before I came into the picture. I had to accept that. They were their own problem now. But even as I accepted that, I knew that the decision I had made was the right one. It was painful, but it was necessary. Some relationships just weren't worth saving. Some family ties, no matter how strong they may seem, were better left broken. The new year came, and with it, a new sense of freedom. I wasn't weighed down by guilt or obligation anymore. I had finally found peace with myself, with the choices I'd made, and with the life I was building. And as I moved forward, I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer defined by the family that had betrayed me. I was Candace, and I was enough. Time passed, as it always does, and I found myself moving forward. I never expected it to be easy, and it wasn't, but I was learning how to live without the weight of the past pressing down on me. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let the wreckage of my family define me anymore. It was a quiet evening when I got another call from Aunt Linda. I'd been thinking about her, knowing she had been caught in the middle of everything, always trying to keep the peace. I had no idea what she wanted this time, but part of me wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. "Candace, sweetie, I just wanted to let you know." Aunt Linda's voice was soft, like she was trying to find the right words. "Tom, he passed away." I froze. My heart clenched for a moment. The sadness was instant, a brief wave of grief I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't for him as the man who had stepped in when my father was gone, or for all the memories of the good moments we'd shared. It was just sadness for the loss of a person who had been there, who had tried his best, even when everything around him was falling apart. Aunt Linda continued, her voice shaky. He'd been in and out of the hospital for months, and it finally, well, he just couldn't fight it anymore. I didn't know, I said, my voice soft, unsure. It wasn't like I hadn't thought about him. It wasn't like I hadn't wondered how he was doing. But I didn't expect this, and I didn't know how to feel. I know you two weren't on the best terms, but I thought you'd want to know. You don't have to come to the funeral if you're not ready, but if you do, we'll be there, and I'll support you. I sat silently for a moment. Part of me wanted to go, to say goodbye, to pay my respects, but the other part of me was still holding on to the hurt, still holding on to the bitterness of everything that had happened. "Thank you for telling me," I finally said. "I'll think about it." Aunt Linda told me to take my time, that I didn't need to make any decisions right then, and we hung up. I sat there for a while after that, thinking about the years, about the things I had done to try and hold things together, about how Tom had always been a steady presence, even if he wasn't perfect, about how, despite the chaos of the last few years, I had to acknowledge the good parts, the moments where he had been there for me when I needed him. But that didn't erase what had happened. It didn't change the lies. It didn't change the betrayal. And for the first time, I realized I had to let go of all of it. I didn't need to go to the funeral. I didn't need to relive the past. What mattered now was how I moved forward, how I carried myself from here on out. Over the next few days, I took a step back. I spent time thinking, reflecting, figuring out what it meant to truly forgive, and what it meant to truly walk away. I didn't need to force myself to feel anything I wasn't ready to feel. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I had already made my decision. And that decision had to come with peace. Peace for myself, for the life I was building. It was strange. The call with Aunt Linda wasn't as painful as I had expected. There was no overwhelming guilt or sadness, just a quiet understanding that the chapter of my life with Tom, with my parents, with Sarah, was over, and it was okay for it to be over. Sometimes you just have to let things go. As I sat there, I realized I had already started to move on. Maybe it wasn't perfect, maybe it wasn't all neatly tied up in a bow, but it was mine, my story, my journey. And it was enough. I spent the next few months doing things that felt good for me. I volunteered at a local shelter. I started a hobby I had always put off. I took long walks and breathed in the air without worrying about anyone else. I began to see life in a new way. I had the space to be myself again, without the weight of expectations or the guilt of trying to fix things that weren't mine to fix. Then, one day, out of nowhere, I got a letter. A real letter, not an email or a text. I hadn't gotten one in ages. It was from my mom. The letter was long, full of regrets and apologies. She acknowledged everything, how she had failed me, how she had allowed Sarah to manipulate the situation, how she had let the lies pile up. She said she understood why I had walked away, and she respected it. But she also said she missed me, that she was proud of the woman I had become, and that she wished we could find a way back to each other. I read it in silence. It wasn't the apology I had expected, but it was the one I needed. It wasn't perfect. She didn't completely own up to everything, but she acknowledged enough. And that was enough for me. I didn't reply right away. I needed time. Time to process, time to think. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had room to breathe, room to forgive if I chose to. I didn't know yet, but I would decide on my own terms, when I was ready. The letter wasn't a door swinging open. It wasn't an invitation to just pick up where we had left off. It was a step forward, a small, tentative step toward healing, even if that healing didn't mean reconciliation. And I realized that was okay. Because in the end, I had finally learned to put myself first, to protect my peace, to stop waiting for people to change and start changing for myself. I had learned that family didn't always mean blood, and forgiveness didn't always mean reconciliation. It meant moving on. So I left the letter on the table and went for a walk. The sun was shining, and the world felt a little lighter, and for the first time in a long time, I was at peace. Story 2. I was startled out of my concentration by the persistent buzzing of the phone in my pocket. I wiped the perspiration from my brow and went outside the temporary clinic, where the rural community was covered in deep shadows from the midday heat. My stomach dropped when I saw the name on the screen. Richard. I nearly didn't respond. I knew that calls from my stepfather were rarely good news after years of putting up with his pranks, but I was overcome by curiosity and even a glimmer of hope. "Hello?" I said in a neutral tone of voice. "Catherine." He spoke in an overly upbeat tone. "I just wanted to let you know. The mountain cabin is sold." I froze, grasping the phone tightly. "What did you do?" "Sold it." As if that were the most normal thing in the world, he repeated. "Don't appear so surprised. It's for the benefit of everyone." Mine, of course. I felt my blood boil as he laughed smugly. "Catherine is my name, and Richard has been my nemesis for as long as I can remember." He quickly wormed his way into the family with charm and good humor after my mom married him when I was 15. Beneath that facade, however, was a man who never thought twice about prioritizing his needs. The cabin wasn't just a vacation home. It served as my haven, a place I'd invested years of love and care onto, tucked away among the highlands. It was where I went to refuel. After rigorous business travels, I entertained friends for lengthy weekends and where I felt most at ease. It infuriated me to hear Richard discuss it as if it were a pawn in his never-ending machinations. "You were not entitled." My voice trembled as I spoke. "You didn't sell that cabin." "Relax," he drawled. "While you're out rescuing the world, I've been running things around here. Furthermore, why would you want to hang on to something you'll never be able to enjoy? I was able to pay off my debts easily. You'll thank me later. I'll thank you when hell freezes over." I snapped, hanging up before he could utter another thing. I paced back and forth in an attempt to quiet the raging emotional storm inside of me. Although Richard's boldness had no limits, he had gone too far this time. He was unaware of the fact that the cabin wasn't totally mine to sell, which I planned to keep to myself for the time being. The legal agreement we had established years prior specifically required both of our signatures for any sale to proceed, and my best friend Laura was a co-owner. This was not the end of it. I sat down on the side of my cot, gazing at the phone in my palm like it may explode into flames. Richard's arrogant tone kept playing in my head. How could he believe that selling something so intimately personal to me was acceptable, as though it were a trinket he could exchange for personal gain? It wasn't just me in the cabin. It was a lifeline. Before my mom remarried, I used to spend my childhood summers there hiking and chasing fireflies. After she departed, it became my anchor. When everything else seemed to be falling apart, there was one thing that felt stable. Naturally, Richard didn't feel the same way about him. It was just another resource to exploit, like a lot of things he had previously tampered with. But this wasn't some small favor or inconvenience. I called this place home. I tapped on Laura's name and my contacts and waited for her to pick up. "Hey, Kathy, what's up?" she said cheerfully when she answered. "Richard sold the cabin," I blurted out, unable to keep the anger from my voice. She paused for a long moment. "What is he?" "It seems that he required the money to settle certain debts related to gaming," I said bitterly. "He thinks he can do whatever he wants. But I know our co-ownership agreement makes that impossible. He doesn't have the authority to sell it without your consent." Laura let out a faint whistle. "He really thought he could get away with this. That man has no shame." "Not at all," I concurred. "I'm going to need your help sorting this out. I'll finish my volunteer assignment and head back home as soon as I can. In the meanwhile, could you please bring up the legal documents? I want to be ready to counter this when I get back." "You got it," Laura said, her voice firm. "We'll take care of this jointly." As I hung up, a peculiar sensation of serenity fell over me. Richard thought he'd outsmarted me, that I was too far away to do anything about his betrayal, but he didn't know who he was dealing with. I wasn't the terrified youngster who used to let him steamroll me. I was an adult now, with resources, allies, and a firm grip on the law. If he thought this was over, he was about to get a rude awakening. The next few days passed in a blur as I finished up my volunteer assignment, trying to keep my emotions in check. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the thought of Richard's betrayal lingered like an unwelcome shadow. The thought of him taking pride in paying off his debts at my expense kept coming to mind. Late one evening, I sat down with my journal, something I traveled with every time. Writing helped me sort through my feelings, and I needed clarity now more than ever. The memories began to come flooding back as I scrawled frantically. The first time I visited the cabin with my mom, the hours I had spent renovating it with Laura, the quiet nights by the fireplace when the world seemed to stand still. It was more than just a structure. It was a piece of me, and Richard thought he could just sell it off like a poker chip. No, not this time. The following day, Laura gave another call, her tone brisk and businesslike. The co-ownership agreement was reviewed by me. "I said," she said, "you were correct. He didn't have the power to sell without my approval. The transaction is void." I felt a wave of relief, but it was soon followed by rage. "Do we know who he sold it to?" "Not yet," Laura replied, "but I pulled the county records and there's no official transfer of ownership. It seems like he could have tried to do this under the table." Richard sounded just like that. Always trying to outsmart the system, always searching for shortcuts. "What's our next step?" I asked. "Well, we can either face him directly," Laura replied, "or we can let the legal process handle it. Either way, we're in the clear. He has nothing to defend himself with in court." I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. "Regards, Laura. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd figure it out," she said warmly, "but I'll always have your back." A plan started to form in my head as I hung up. I'd get my work done here, go home, and confront Richard. I wasn't going to scream or yell. He anticipated that. No. I adopt a different approach. I'd use the one thing Richard always underestimated: my ability to think ahead. He believed he'd won, but by the time I was done, he'd realize he'd miscalculated me for the final time. When I eventually reached home, the first thing I noticed was the stillness. The cabin always welcomed me with a sense of peace, but now that silence felt ominous. My houseplants were slightly wilted. The mail had piled up at the door and the fridge was virtually empty. I set my bags down and exhaled the weight of what I needed to do, settling on my shoulders. Before I could even unpack, my phone buzzed. It was Richard. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but then I thought better of it. Time to face him. With a tone full of fake happiness, he said, Well, if it isn't my globe-trotting stepdaughter." Finally, back to reality. "What do you want, Richard?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. With a smug tone, he said, "I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're not too irritated over the whole cabin issue. I mean, it's gone now, so there's no use crying over spilled milk." I tightened my jaw. "Funny you should mention that," I replied, keeping my tone calm. "Because as far as I can tell, it's not gone. I looked through the ownership documents with Laura. The sale didn't go through. You can't sell what doesn't belong to you." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to let me know I'd touched a nerve. "That's crazy," Richard muttered, his voice tightening. "The buyer paid in cash and the paperwork is handled. The deal is finalized." "No, it isn't," I said. "Laura and I co-own the cabin. Remember, without her approval, the sale is void. It's still ours legally." He had a fragile chuckle. "Don't you think you're very intelligent? Always playing the ideal daughter, always attempting to control everything. Catherine, you have no idea how difficult things have been for me. I did what I had to do. You stole from me." I fired back. "And you think I'm expected to feel sorry for you?" "Richard, you've made up your mind. You will now need to live with them." He hung up on me at the end of the call, leaving me standing there with my phone in hand and trembling with a mixture of triumph and rage. I allowed Richard to take advantage of my patience, manipulate circumstances, and guilt-trip me for years. However, it is no longer the case. I wasn't just defending the cabin. I was taking back my voice, my boundaries, and my mental stability. I opened my laptop and sat at the kitchen table the following morning, going over the files Laura had forwarded to me. The terms of the co-ownership agreement were very clear. Neither of us could sell the cabin without the other's written consent. Richard's actions weren't only unethical, they were obviously unlawful. My thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. When I opened it, there he was, Richard, with his typical arrogant smile. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, though he didn't wait for an answer before stepping inside. I folded my arms, watching as he made himself comfortable in one of my chairs. "What do you want, Richard?" "Look, Catherine," he continued, his tone dripping with contempt. "I know you're upset, but you have to understand my position. I had to be desperate. The people I owed money to weren't exactly patient." I arched an eyebrow. "And you thought stealing my property was the solution? Borrowing?" he corrected, as though that made it better. "I was going to make it back. Once my luck turned around, I would have paid you back every penny." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Your luck. Richard, you're betting on that. You've been gambling away money for as long as I've known you, and it's never worked out. Why would this time be any different?" He shuffled slightly, but his arrogance immediately returned. "You're going overboard. It's just a cabin. You're not even here most of the time. Why not give it to someone else to use? Because it's mine. It's my home, so I lost it. You have no say in what I do with my property or what I value. And for the record, Laura values it just as much as I do. Your little sale is invalid and you know it." His expression darkened, and I briefly caught a glimpse of what might have been fear. "Really, you wouldn't approach the police, would you? You wouldn't ruin your own stepfather like that." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. "Try me for the first time." Richard didn't have a clever answer. He stood up, muttering something under his breath, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I sank back into my chair, my heart pounding. I was startled by the encounter. However, I also experienced a glimmer of fulfillment. Richard was starting to realize that his typical techniques wouldn't work on me anymore. This wasn't just about the cabin. It was about standing up to someone who had taken advantage of me for far too long. After Richard's dramatic exit, I called Laura to update her. He arrived at my home. I attempted to make up a tearful narrative about how he had borrowed the cabin to pay off his obligations while I paced the living room. Laura snorted on the other end of the line. Borrowed? Does he even hear himself? What were you saying? I informed him the deal was invalid, and if he pushed me, I'd go to the authorities. That seemed to shake him a little, I said, but he's probably already planning his next move because he knows Richard. Well, let him plot, Laura responded firmly. We've got the law on our side. To assist us in creating a formal cease and desist letter, I have reached out to a lawyer. We'll have a legal document trail ready to stop him if he tries to entangle the buyer once again. I nodded, her words grounding me. Regards, Laura. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd figure it out, she said, but we're in this together. I spent the next few days collecting as much evidence as I could. I recorded the co-ownership agreement, acquired screenshots of text conversations Richard had sent regarding the transaction, and even tracked down the real estate agent who had been involved. When I contacted the agent, her voice was strained. Look, she responded hastily, I didn't know the whole situation. Richard informed me he had clearance to sell. If I'd known the cabin had a co-owner, I never would have touched the deal. You do now, though, I said, keeping my tone steady. I'm not trying to drag you into this, but I need your cooperation. Can you confirm that Richard signed the paperwork alone? Indeed, she acknowledged. The buyer hasn't paid in full yet because I flagged the transaction as unusual. I can give you with the paperwork if you need them. That would be useful. I hung up after writing down her details. I had a fresh feeling of resolve. Richard had gambled on my being too quiet or too distant to fight back, but he was about to realize exactly how wrong he'd been. That evening, Laura called with more good news. She said the letter was ready. We'll send it first thing tomorrow. And if he attempts to pull, anything else will escalate. Excellent, I replied, a small smile creeping onto my face. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was gaining control of the situation. Richard felt he could steamroll me, but he was about to find out that I wasn't that easily vanquished. The next morning, Laura and I finalized the cease and desist letter and sent it to Richard. The language was plain and harsh. Any additional attempts to claim ownership of the cabin or contact the buyer will result in legal action. I imagined his expression when he received it, probably a mix of fury and astonishment. He has been able to intimidate and manipulate people into obedience for years. However, he was facing a wall this time. Charming his way through was not an option. The real estate agent sent me the promised paperwork via email later that day. I felt sick to my stomach when I saw Richard's signature on the phony sale agreement, but it also solidified my resolve. He hadn't just gone too far, he had trampled it underfoot. That evening, I got a call from Detective Miller, a local cop Laura had called to aid with the investigation. Miss Daniels, he began, his tone professional. I have looked over the materials that you and Miss Langley sent me. Obviously, the sale was not authorized. We can proceed with a formal investigation based on the evidence, if you want to. I answered without hesitation, yes. Detective Miller went on, I want to follow up on this. We'll start by contacting the buyer and explaining the situation. If Richard continues to intervene, we'll move to criminal charges for false misrepresentation. I responded, thank you, Detective. Kindly notify me if you want any more assistance from me. I was both relieved and excited as I hung up. Now that the wheels were turning, there was no going back. The next day, Richard phoned. Despite the wrath in his voice, there was a hint of desperation below. Do you have any clue what you've done, Catherine? He made a demand. Everything is being ruined by you. No, Richard, I responded quietly. I'm defending what's rightfully mine. This is what you've done to yourself. You've been so unappreciative throughout your life. He sneered. When your mother was unable to manage things, I took over. And you pay me back like this? I couldn't help but chuckle bitterly. Richard, you didn't intervene. You assumed control. To obtain what you desired, you deceived, manipulated, and exploited others. And now you're paying the price." He tried to disagree, but I cut him off. "We're done talking. You should speak with my lawyer if you have any additional comments." After hanging up, I reclined in my chair. My heart is pounding. I had finally gained control, and Richard's days of shoving me around were over. Detective Miller gave me an update over the phone 2 days later. "We've talked to the buyer, Miss Daniels, and they've decided to stop the deal. They are prepared to assist with any additional investigation and were not aware of the co-ownership agreement." I felt a wave of relief. "That's great news. Does this mean the sale is officially void?" "Indeed," he confirmed. "You and Miss Langley are still the proprietors of the cabin, but in order to deal with your stepfather's dishonest behavior, we will have to keep the case open. Do you wish to press charges?" I hesitated for only a moment. "Yes," I said firmly. "I want him held accountable." "Understood." Detective Miller stated we'll take the appropriate action. "Thank you for your cooperation." I took a deep breath after the call. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm returning. Richard's plans were failing, and the cabin was secure. Later that afternoon, I contacted Laura to convey the news. Officially, the sale is null and void. I informed her that the cabin was once again ours since the buyers had backed out. "That's a big victory," Laura replied, her enthusiasm clear. "But what about Richard?" I clarified that the police are proceeding with their investigation. "This is not something he can get away with." "Good," she said. "It's about time someone stood up to him." Her words stuck with me long after we hung up. For years, I'd let Richard get away with so much. His manipulations, his entitlement, his complete disregard for boundaries. However, I had retaliated this time, and it seemed like a turning moment, not just for this situation, but for how I approached everything in my life. That evening, I went to the cabin for the first time since coming home. Stepping inside, I felt an enormous flood of emotion. The smell of the wood panels, the familiar creak of the floorboards, it all reminded me of why this place meant so much to me. I sat by the fireside, letting the stillness of the mountains wash over me. This was my shelter, the spot where I'd formed memories, celebrated milestones, and sought solace in the craziness of life, and it was still mine. No thanks to Richard. For the first time, I allowed myself grin. I wasn't just regaining a property. I was regaining a part of myself. A week later, Detective Miller called with the final update. "Miss Daniels, I wanted to let you know that your stepfather has been legally charged with false misrepresentation and attempted theft of property. He will have to show up for court. And based on the information we've obtained, the case against him is solid." A mixture of feelings, including relief, validation, and even a hint of melancholy, were felt at hearing those words. "Thank you for everything, Detective," I said genuinely. "You were very strong in handling the situation," he said. "It's not easy to stand up to relatives, but you did the right thing." After the call, I sat silently for a bit, processing the weight of everything that had happened. Even though he was poisonous, Richard had been a fixture in my life for years. And now I was finally free from his machinations. The next day, Laura and I met at the cabin. She'd brought a bottle of wine to celebrate, and we sat on the porch overlooking the mountains. "We can smell the earth and pine in the crisp air," she remarked, lifting her glass and not allowing anyone force us about. I clinked my glass to hers, chuckling quietly to ourselves. I became aware of how much I had learnt from this experience while we conversed. I had devoted a significant portion of my life to avoiding confrontation and maintaining harmony, particularly with Richard. However, I had defended myself this time, and it seemed like a turning moment for both my relationship with him and my self-perception. "You are aware," Laura murmured, interrupting my thoughts. "This cabin has always been more than simply a property. It represents all we have created and strived for. Don't ever let someone steal that from you again." Her remarks resonated. The cabin wasn't just a house in the mountains. It demonstrated my self-reliance, tenacity, and resolve to defend the things that were most important to me. Later that night, as I sat by the fireside, I felt a serenity I hadn't experienced in years. I was put to the test in unexpected ways by Richard's deception, but it also demonstrated my strength. The cabin was secure. I had set my limits up front, and I felt really in charge of my life for the first time in a long time. In the weeks that followed, life eventually settled into a new pattern. Once a battlefield for Richard's avarice, the cabin was once again my haven. Each creak of the floorboards, every ruffle of the trees beyond, reminded me of everything I'd battled to defend. Richard didn't communicate with me much, following the filing of the accusations. Once my mother phoned. She spoke hesitantly. "You know how he gets Catherine." This time, her typical defense of him sounded flimsy. "I do." I gave a fair response, and for that reason, I took the necessary action. She didn't dispute. For the first time, there was no attempt to guilt me, no frantic appeal for peace. She sighed quietly before speaking. "I wish you tranquility. I've done so already." I said. I meant it too. Over the next couple of weekends, Laura and I worked on minor cabin improvements. Along the property's edge, we planted some wildflowers, repaired the roof, and painted the porch. I felt as though I was reclaiming more than just the area. I was reclaiming myself with each nail driven and brushstroke used. Laura turned to face me one evening while we were sitting on the porch, taking in the sunset. "What will you do next, Kathy? You confronted Richard and reclaimed the cabin. What will be the next big thing?" I paused to consider her question. I got the answer with unexpected clarity. I stated that I will continue to volunteer, travel, and live my life as I saw fit. I'm not allowing anyone else tell me how to live life this time, though. She lifted her glass to that and grinned. As the days went by, I saw that I was thinking more about what I had discovered during this experience. Richard and the cabin weren't the only things at stake. It has to do with recognizing my own power. I had let his actions to determine how much I resisted and how much I put up with for years. However, I was now aware that I could establish and uphold boundaries. No matter how uncomfortable it made others, the cabin stood as a symbol of that growth, a reminder that I didn't have to sacrifice my peace or my values for anyone else's comfort. I stood on the porch one evening and breathed in the cold, pine-scented air as the sun sank behind the mountains. I felt completely at home for the first time in years, in my own life as well as in the cabin. Story 3. What are you saying? Ryan will be CEO. I'm the one who saved this hotel. My voice echoed through the newly renovated lobby, bouncing off the modern, mountain-inspired decor I'd spent months perfecting. Mom's dismissive wave felt like a slap in the face. "Claire, honey, your brother has more natural leadership ability," she said as though addressing a child. "You're too detail-oriented." Ryan walked in at that point, hands in his pockets, wearing that smug smile I'd seen since we were kids. "Hey sis, don't take it personally. While I concentrate on the larger picture, someone else needs to take care of the daily tasks. My name is Claire Anderson, and at 52, I never thought I'd find myself fighting for recognition in my own family's business. After 20 successful years in hotel management in Chicago, I'd given up everything to come home to Colorado and save our struggling family hotel. The irony? I was the only one with true hospitality experience. Ryan, my younger brother, had changed jobs frequently and never held one position for more than a year. Here's what really gets me. 8 months ago, my dad contacted me in tears stating they were weeks away from bankruptcy. I didn't think twice. After cashing in my money and selling my property in Chicago, I returned home to assist. The hotel was stuck in a time warp. Reviews that made me cringe, data decor, and no social media presence. I worked day and night upgrading everything from the reservation system to the lobby furniture. God knows how many nights I spent hunched over spreadsheets, negotiating with suppliers and training staff. I even used my industry connections to get us featured in travel magazines, and it worked. The change was amazing. The Mountain Pine Lodge turned from a 2-star nightmare to the buzz of the community. Our reservations increased, and for the first time in years, we were finally earning a profit. Everything was thoughtfully chosen to offer an outstanding guest experience, from the enhanced utilities to the locally produced artwork. However, I've come to the realization that none of it matters to our parents as I stand here and watch Ryan sneer as they give him all I've achieved. The worst thing? They're announcing his promotion at tonight's staff meeting. The same meeting where I was supposed to present our record-breaking quarterly results. I can feel our staff members watching me, particularly Sarah, our head housekeeper of 20 years. They all know who actually turned this city around. However, they are compelled, like me, to watch this farce unfold, acting as though this is fair or normal in some way. To understand how we got here, allow me to take you back a little. The Mountain Pine Lodge has been in our family since my grandparents constructed it in 1971. I basically grew up in these halls, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up while other kids played house. I was assisting Mom with check-ins and seeing Dad tackle maintenance concerns. The hotel was my second home, and I enjoyed every minute of it. However, Ryan, who was 3 years younger than me, was unique. During my time in college studying hospitality management, he never shown any interest in the family company. To discover himself, he was switching majors, first architecture, then business, and then quitting out completely. This never appeared to worry Mom or Dad. He's simply imaginative. He needs time to get his bearings, they would explain. Meanwhile, I was establishing my career in Chicago, working my way up from front desk manager to regional director for a big hotel chain. My family only gave me grudging congrats for every accomplishment. That's lovely, sweetheart, but when are you coming home? When are you getting married? It was never sufficient. When Dad called regarding the hotel's financial woes, I understood exactly what needed to be done. The establishment was losing money, obsolete systems and ineffective procedures, no effective marketing plan. The reviews online were nasty, stuck in the past. Major upgrading is required. The cost is not worth it. The disintegration of my family's legacy devastated me. I jumped right into the rescue effort after taking a leave of absence from my work in Chicago, which ultimately turned into a resignation. The first month was essentially damage management, repairing malfunctioning machinery. The reservation system is being updated, teaching employees the fundamentals of customer service. To update the lobby and replace the outdated carpets, I took money out of my savings. I carefully considered every dollar I spent in order to optimize return on investment. The fact that Ryan wasn't even present for all of this truly irritates me. While in Denver, he was ostensibly networking, but was actually simply having a good time with his pals. He would periodically attend family gatherings, provide a few hazy recommendations about updating our strategy, and then vanish once again. Yet nevertheless, in my parents' eyes, his infrequent participation was just as significant as mine daily grind. I kept telling myself it would be worth it, that they would eventually see my worth once we seen the outcomes, the more bookings, the better ratings, and the favorable reviews. I suppose I ought to have been more aware. It has been a nightmare for the last 3 weeks. Ryan acts as like he owns the establishment, making several changes without having any idea how a hotel operates. Just yesterday, he decided to reduce our continental breakfast service to save money, evidently unaware that one of our main selling factors is our breakfast ratings. When I tried to show him the visitor satisfaction figures, he just chuckled and said, "Numbers aren't everything, sis." However, this morning's events were what really drove me insane. He was dismissing Maria, our head of housekeeping, who had worked for us for 15 years, when I stepped in. Why? We would have been dangerously understaffed at peak checkout hours if she hadn't been more accommodating with his new scheduling scheme. Although I was able to step in and preserve her job, I will always remember the humiliated expression on her face. I tried discussing it with my parents. I brought financial projections for the upcoming quarter, spreadsheets demonstrating our progress, and guest reviews complimenting our recent advancements, while Mom stroked my hand and whispered, "Dear, you need to give your brother time to find his footing." Dad simply gazed at his coffee. His ideas are so brilliant. I saw it at that moment. The former Riverside Lodge's for sale sign. On the way home. Before it fell into ruin last season, it was our primary rival for years. My thoughts were racing as I pulled into the parking lot. The facility had a lot more promise than our hotel, including a considerably larger spa area and excellent views of the ski slopes. I knew precisely what to do with it, even if it needed some work. For over an hour, I sat in my car, gazing at that sign and recalling all the times my parents had chosen Ryan over me. Every success disregarded, every suggestion second-guessed, every contribution reduced. Something inside me cracked, or perhaps everything finally fell into place. I called my realtor right there in the parking lot. The proprietors wanted to sell, and I was able to make it happen because of my excellent credit score and money. I had already planned a viewing for the next morning by the time I got home. I felt invigorated, even eager, for the first time in months. Ryan wouldn't have to ruin all I'd worked so hard to create. I would construct something fresh instead, something that was wholly mine. Let them realize what they gave up when they picked him over me. The following several months were quite busy. I poured everything into transforming the Riverside Lodge into something extraordinary. I was working with contractors, renovating venues, and assembling a team of elite hospitality specialists at Mountain Pine Lodge, while Ryan was busy hosting parties. I gave it the name The Summit. I wanted everyone to understand exactly what I was striving for, even if it was a little on the nose. The word spread swiftly across the town. I was accused of being bitter by others for competing with my own family. Others silently encouraged me, particularly those who had collaborated with me at Mountain Pine. Initially, my folks attempted guilt-tripping me. How could you harm your brother in this way? To us? At our increasingly infrequent family dinners, Mom would inquire. I simply grinned and shifted the conversation. In the meantime, Mountain Pine Lodge was suffering as a result of Ryan's poor management. Inconsistent service maintenance difficulties, including issues with hygiene, began to appear in their ratings. In the first month of his tenure, 3 long-time employees left. Rumor had it that they had to cut their rates in order to keep the place occupied. 6 months after that tragic day in the lobby, the summit had its grand opening. I will always remember the looks on my family's faces as they entered. Ryan's hardly contained rage, Dad's startled eyes taking in the crowded home, and Mom's tight grin barely masking her disbelief. There, the local newspaper interviewed visitors and took pictures of Aspen's newest upscale resort. When Ryan caught me near the bar, he whispered, "You're trying to destroy us. Our family is being directly attacked by this." I simply grinned and said, "No, Ryan. Here I am, thriving in spite of our family." The 2 hotels couldn't have been more different from one another. The top was causing a stir with its eco-friendly projects and opulent facilities, while Mountain Pine Lodge was having trouble with basic upkeep. At the family hotel, every detail I had envisioned but had been turned down was now a reality. Right here. Everything was just as I had imagined, from the cuisine at the restaurant that used local ingredients to the cutting-edge spa services. But success came with its share of difficulties. Other lodging establishments began imitating our creative reservation approach. My parents' old acquaintances in town began chatting among themselves about how I was ruining the family. Some of my devoted Mountain Pine Lodge visitors even confessed to feeling bad about picking a side. As the meeting gained speed, the true problems emerged. There was pressure on my old Mountain Pine Lodge merchants to stop doing business with me. Some of my longtime family friends abruptly stopped coming to our regular coffee dates, even though Mom had quite the social circle in town. Even my position on the local tourism board was taken away from me. I wasn't going to let small-town politics ruin everything, even if it seemed like there was a conflict of interest. I had constructed. I discovered better suppliers in Denver when locals were hesitant. After being fired by the tourist board, I concentrated on establishing direct connections with ski excursion companies. Every challenge just made me more creative and tenacious. Then the greatest test of all took place. One morning, my parents arrived at my office looking distressed. A call to Mountain Pines loans was being threatened by the bank. They had finally been caught up by Ryan's poor management. They want my return. To teach Ryan the ropes, of course, but not as CEO. We are related. Mom begged. The hotel cannot be allowed to fail. Sitting across from my desk in the office I had constructed for myself, I gazed at them both and had an odd sense of serenity. I responded that I had offered to help 8 months prior. Ryan was your choice. You must now live with that decision. Dad tried something else. He whispered softly, "Consider your grandfather's legacy." I made an effort to uphold the tradition of this hotel, which has been in our family for many generations. I fired back. It was given to someone who treats it as his own playground by you. After that, the rumors around town became more nasty. I used to be the resentful sister, the ungrateful daughter, and the one who would turn against her own family out of spite. On some days, such rumors caused me more pain than I would want to acknowledge. However, I knew I had made the right decision every morning when I walked into the lobby of the summit and saw my vision come to life. My crew turned into my extended family. Many were previous workers of Mountain Pine who left because they were fed up with Ryan's disorganized management style. They realized that this was not a place for retaliation. Making something significant that we could all be proud of was the goal. The biennial Colorado Luxury Hotels Awards were the tipping point. The summit was nominated for Best New Boutique Hotel, and Mountain Pine Lodge was noteworthy, absent from any category. When they declared our victory, my team and I were seated in the ballroom. I saw my folks in the back of the room as I made my way to the stage. They'd arrived up unannounced, perhaps expecting to support our family hotel as they did for years. The expressions on their faces spoke for themselves. Dad appeared to have aged 10 years, and Mom was holding back tears. Ryan wasn't present. Months before, he had ceased going to business gatherings, saying they were only popularity contests. However, everyone in the room understood the significance of this moment. Officially, the pupil had outperformed the instructor. The meticulous daughter had created something superior than the family inheritance they had refused to give her. I praised our visitors and my colleagues during my award speech, and I even brought up Mountain Pine Lodge, the place where I first discovered my passion for hospitality. I could tell by the awkward shifting of the crowd that they noticed my subtle jab, but what really made a difference was the subsequent conversation. A respected travel magazine editor sought me for an interview. We discussed the success of the meeting. My parents were hovering close by, obviously listening. They listened to all I had to say about my career, including how I was inspired to start my own business after being passed over for the CEO position. Being underappreciated can sometimes lead to the greatest success stories. Loud enough for them to hear, I said. That evening, the magazine editor told me they were honoring the Summit Best Boutique Hotel in the Rockies in their future edition. An article about conventional hotels' difficulties adapting, of which Mountain Pine Lodge is a classic example, would appear in the same issue. Our small town felt like a bomb went off when the article was released. All those who had muttered that I was spiteful had to admit the truth. I had created something remarkable. At the same time, Mountain Pine Lodge was collapsing due to their own bad choices rather than me. It's difficult to avoid experiencing a range of emotions when you reflect on everything. The way my parents handled me and dismissed what I had done as though it were just another aspect of who I was still causes me pain. Perhaps the larger portion feels free. I'm living my life on my terms, not waiting for someone else's affirmation. Every morning when I enter the top, I am reminded of the things I created myself. Life guests are happily discussing their plans for the day in the lively lobby. Employees smiling warmly and working effectively. When the doors open, the clear mountain air wafts in, mingled with the subtle scent of freshly made coffee. The Mountain Pine Lodge is all I could have ever imagined, and I'm incredibly proud to see it flourish. In unexpected ways, my summit team has become my family. Several of them, including Sarah and Maria, were once workers at my parents' hotel who quit because they shared my perception of the lack of leadership. Their dedication humbles me, and they have played a crucial role in the summit's success. Sarah frequently quips that she at last feels as like her opinions and experiences are respected, and I completely understand her feelings. I've begun getting back in touch with old pals outside of work. I neglected to maintain important relationships for years because I was too preoccupied with trying to prove myself to my parents. I'm now scheduling hikes and coffee dates, rebuilding those bonds. Even those of the town's residents who at first disapproved of my choice to compete with my family have since acknowledged that they respect what I've achieved. Additionally, I've begun to rediscover my position in the community. I've been able to rebuild relationships and even forge new ones by hosting events at the summit. We had a fundraiser for the neighborhood animal shelter in our new event space just last month, and it was a great success. I was reminded of why I first wanted to work in hospitality when I saw people uniting for a worthy cause. To design areas that are comfortable and joyful for individuals. It's not flawless, though. Even though my parents and Ryan have caused me a lot of pain, there are times when I think about them, especially on calm nights. I wish that things were different. I've found myself questioning whether they've ever fully comprehended the sacrifices I made to preserve the history of our family. Nevertheless, I've realized that I no longer require their approval. My happiness, my success, nobody can take them away from me. They are mine. I lived in the shadow of their expectations for a very long time. However, I am now at last standing in my own light. Approximately 3 weeks following the Colorado Luxury Hotels Awards, my parents made another attempt to get in touch. They asked me to come over for supper, just the three of us. After some hesitation, I made the decision to go. I wasn't waiting for a genuine apology, but I was curious to hear what they had to say. The vibe was different when I got to the house. My dad avoided eye contact and fiddled with his watch, as he often did when he felt uncomfortable, while my mom smiled nervously as she welcomed me. They struck up a conversation during dinner, mentioning things like how the weather was unusually warm for the season, and how they had heard about the most recent 5-star assessment of the summit. They were clearly preparing for something. At last, my father cleared his throat and began, "We wanted to let Claire know that we're proud of what you've done. We know we haven't always shown it, but we do recognize how much work you've put in," my mother said hurriedly. "The top is just amazing." Their words didn't make me feel good, even though I wanted to. After years of rejection, it seemed like too little, too late. I simply nodded and waited for what I knew would happen next instead. As expected, my mother jumped right in. "Ryan has been having difficulties. He's in over his head and the hotel is struggling. We wanted to know if you could assist us get back on track and perhaps lead him." I remained silent for a minute. I stared at them both, letting their words linger in the air, observed them closely. My dad appeared to be studying the tablecloth as though it contained the solutions to all of their problems, and my mom, with her well-groomed nails gripping her wine glass a bit too tightly. "I offered to help a year ago," I eventually said, my voice calm but forceful. "I gave up my life in Chicago to rescue Mountain Pine Lodge. Despite knowing that Ryan wasn't prepared, you decided to put him in charge, knowing I have the experience to make it succeed. Then you didn't want me to be your leader? And you're expecting me to take over now that everything has gone wrong. I apologize, but I am unable to accomplish it." My mother started to argue, but I interrupted her by raising a hand. "If you want advice, I'll offer it to you. I can suggest vendors, tactics, and even staff training courses. However, I will not return to repair Ryan's damage. I'm no longer in charge of that." They were at a loss for words. At last, my father muttered something about appreciating my stance, but it was obvious that he was disappointed. My mother didn't press it, even though it seemed like she wanted to dispute more. I felt lighter than I have in years as I drove home that evening. Although it wasn't simple, it was essential to establish such boundaries. I wasn't cleaning up Ryan's mess or going out of my way to please my parents. I was making a decision about my future, my happiness, and myself. Saying no to my parents gave me the confidence to set boundaries in other areas of my life as well, and I noticed a change in how I carried myself over the next few weeks. I took the time to explain my choices to others, whether they were personal or professional. I grew more at ease ending relationships that were no longer beneficial to me. Instead, I concentrated on the people who made me happy and supported me. We achieved unprecedented heights at the peak. Because we had the greatest occupancy rates in the area, other boutique hotel owners began contacting us to seek our advisory services. Meanwhile, my parents' hotel kept getting worse. However, I have heard that in an attempt to improve matters, they have finally brought in a qualified hospitality consultant. I didn't mind that Ryan and I didn't talk much. I no longer required him to recognize what had happened or provide an apology. He bore the burden of his resentment, not me. The summit now reflected all of my efforts to become resilient, independent, and visionary, and I thrived along with it. One morning, I was standing in the summit's lobby when I saw the sunshine streaming in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the contemporary furnishings in a cozy warmth. I designed. A family passed by. As they made plans for the day, they laughed. One of my employees skillfully gave a couple their plan for a picturesque snowshoe trek. I realized then just how far I had come, both personally and professionally. For years, I had determined my value based on my parents' acceptance of me and their capacity to recognize and appreciate my contributions. However, I now understood that I was no longer in need of it. I had constructed more than simply a motel here. It demonstrated my fortitude, inventiveness, and capacity to flourish in spite of the difficulties I faced. It had been a difficult journey. Although it was painful, I felt liberated when I let go of the hope that my family would change. I no longer felt burdened by their rejection or the weight of their expectations. Rather, I was proud. I was pleased with what I had produced. I was proud of the life I was leading and the team I had built. I wasn't merely getting by. I was thriving. The Regional Hospitality Awards ceremony was the kind of event I used to dream about attending. With journalists, hotel owners, and industry leaders from all over the state, the room was a hive of activity. I noticed my parents sitting in the back of the room as the announcer started to name the nominees for Boutique Hotel of the Year. Even though I couldn't read their faces, I could tell how important this moment was to us all. The room erupted in cheers when the winner, the summit, was revealed. As I made my way to the stage, my team applauded. As I accepted the award, my heart was racing. I looked at my folks. My mom's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and my dad nodded slightly. Although it wasn't exactly an apology, I still appreciated the acknowledgement, which I had long since stopped anticipating. I celebrated with my team after the ceremony. I didn't go to my parents, and they didn't approach me. I wanted to share this moment with those who had made it possible for me. I was genuinely liberated, without requiring their consent, liberated from the specters of their decisions. The goal of success was no longer to disprove them. It was about proving to myself that I was capable, deserving, and enough. And as I raised a glass with my team that night, I knew I'd finally found peace.